I just uploaded some shorts, and some of them are from the binaural beats. I tapped into some of your advice and things on how the binaural beats work and everything. And it occurred to me that one of, when you say intuition, one of Einstein's famous quotes alludes to imagination being more valuable than knowledge. So that kind of gave me the idea that had Einstein been living at this time, in this time frame, he would have been on board with your consciousness as fundamental thing because he very clearly valued that intuition, as Steve Jobs did, as had stated too. So that is interesting for someone who had so much knowledge, such high intellect, and so many facts, that the intuition was the thing that really propelled him further
Hmm.
than than everything he knew.
Yeah, well, the intuition is a very important part. It's, you are consciousness. You have these two channels, the intuitive channel and the intellectual channel, or the logical channel. And in general, people, at least people in our culture, tend to develop their intellectual side, their intellectual channel, and they don't do anything at all to develop their intuitive channel. So it's like you have a two-cylinder car and you're only running on one cylinder. You're missing out on a great deal of information and input that's very valuable. So the intellect tends to become a bully. And when the intuition starts to learn and starts to grow, the intellect jumps in over top, always interrupts and says, oh, I can figure that out. I can tell you what that answer is, or questions. Ah, that wasn't really your dead mother talking to you. That was just you making stuff up in your mind. So the intellect, butts in and analyzes and judges and does the things that it does because it feels dominant. It becomes the bully. And the intuitive side becomes the shrinking violet. The intuitive side says, oh yeah, you're right. Who knows what that was? Probably just my imagination. And that means that the intellect kind of chases the intuitive side away. And that's the big problem that people, particularly left brain, intellectuals, have with experiencing paranormal things, because their intellects get in the way and prohibit them from having that experience. And that's something that's very difficult for them to change, because their whole life they've been honing that intellect. It's by that intellect that they earn money. It's by that intellect that they stay out of trouble. It's by that intellect that everything good happens. So they've trained their intellect to be the boss, and the intellect likes being the boss. So they have a particularly hard time learning to do paranormal things, because the intellect needs to sit down and be quiet while the intuitive side works. And eventually, the two can become good friends. Your intuitive side and your intellectual side have mutual respect for each other, and they cooperate. They each do what they do best, and they share the problem solving. One gathers information, that's your intuitive side, and the other does the processing, the analysis of that information. So, and you gather some information from your intellect as well, but you don't have as rich a source of information in the intellect as you have on the intuitive side. So anyway, in a really healthy person, both sides work together and have mutual respect for each other. In our culture, not so much. The intellect is the bully boy of the mind, and most people have absolutely no ability whatsoever to do anything paranormal because of it.
Well, I think I hadn't really thought about this before. Everyone quoted the Einstein saying
Mm-hmm.
intuition is more valuable than knowledge, but I didn't really contemplate it too much. But clearly, he must have had respect for both his high intellectual
Mm-hmm.
process and relying then on intuition. He must have been balanced that way naturally.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something quite remarkable that I hadn't really really considered before.
Yeah. When Einstein developed his, the very first theory of his, which was called special relativity, I read some documents where he was discussing, what led up to that. And he said in his mind, while he was, we might call it in meditation, but when he was in a quiet space where he was no longer intellectually doing things, he was just experiencing. Okay, that's the way it is in the intuitive side. He was riding on a beam of light. And he was seeing the perspective of the light going at the speed c, and how that perspective was different between various frames of reference, who he was looking at and who was looking at him. And he kind of got his ideas about the nature of relativity from this experience of riding on a beam of light. That's what he imagines. What would that be like? If I was moving at the speed of light, what would other places look like? Other reality frames, another platform somewhere that wasn't going at the speed of light. What would that do? And as he got that intuition to ask those questions, then he took his intellect and started doing the math to see what the answer was, and he ended up with special relativity. And then he wanted to add gravitation to that special relativity, so he created general relativity, which took the facts of special relativity and added added a lot, but particularly and specifically it added gravitation to it. There's some documentation that Einstein did use his intuition very effectively to come to the conclusions that he came to. And his intuition and his intellect did indeed work together. So one would think that he was probably unusually balanced between those two. And I think you'll find that most of the people who have become known as great minds, whether they're in science or philosophy or whatever, that they do find a lot of their time that is used in mental space, not just examining things in the physical space, but mulling over things within their mind. And when you do that, when you have in your mind, you're doing something, and we can call that imagination if you like, you can get to a point where it's not just you, kind of leading the conversation. It's not just you saying, well, if I was on a bowl of light, this is what I'd see. That's your intellect. But rather just experiencing, here I am on a ray of light, and this is what I see, and experience it. So if you experience rather than analyze when you're in this mental state, then you tend to get answers. You tend to have epiphanies. You tend to get the sudden awareness of not necessarily the whole answer, but of a way to go, of a direction to explore, of an idea to think about. You get bits and pieces of it. And I think most great minds do a lot of that inner cogitation, because otherwise they wouldn't be able to get the great things that they've gotten. So it's the mixture of those both that are really, really important.
That is really fascinating that you recalled that information about Einstein. But what I noticed when you first spoke, that he imagined what it would be like. This is what you recommend when you recommend to people in Tom's Park to use your imagination and then engage that. So he not only he dreamt up what it would be like to ride that beam of light. He used that for his imagination, and he took it further. And then, as you say, must have gotten that data stream that took it further and came up with special relativity. Now, if that isn't a validation of your process in Tom's Park, I don't know what is.
It's not just a daydream or an imagination, but it's one in which you are totally consumed.
Yeah.
In other words, when you're totally consumed with the imagination, you're no longer aware of where you're sitting. People walking down the hall behind you, what time it is. You stop hearing the traffic noises outside. You're totally focused on what's going on in your mind, not what's going on out in the physical world. And what that means is you're no longer here. Because here means you're connected to the physical world. Well, your body's here, but your mind isn't. Your mind is someplace else. And that someplace else is the realm of consciousness. And that's where your intuition works, is in that realm of consciousness. That's where you are. So just imagining, like if you just imagine, well, what if a pink elephant flew up here to this window and said hello to me, and you kind of imagine that, that's just you making it up with your intellect. But if you get into an imaginative process in which you are completely consumed with that imagination story, then you're no longer making it up. It's just happening. It unravels as it unravels, and you
As you
can learn
say,
things.
it's how you
Yeah,
catch that data stream from the
yeah.
LCS. Yep.
That's how you catch that data stream, exactly. So you are actually out of your body. Out of the body just means you're no longer processing physical sense data. When you don't hear the traffic, you don't notice the person walking behind you, you're not aware of, you're sitting on a chair. Now, if you think about it, you say, oh, what am I sitting? Oh, yeah, I feel the chair now on my bottom. There's the chair. You can do that. But when you do that, you're no longer in that imagination space. But you can go back to that imagination space where the chair doesn't exist. Your body doesn't exist. You're just pure mind having an experience, you see. And when you are just pure mind having an experience, we call that out of body, not because anything came out of your body. That's kind of silly. That's what people thought, a couple of 100 years ago. The spirit, comes up out of the top of your head and leaves your body or your soul or something. Well, that's nonsense. All you're doing is letting go of the data stream that defines this reality that we call the physical universe. And you're getting another data stream that defines whatever it is you're imagining about. And when you get that data stream, that comes from the larger consciousness system, and the system can put into that data stream anything it wants, take you on any journey that it sees fit. And what it does is it gives you experiences that are applicable to your growth. So let's say you get into that. Let's say you're a young man and you're 20 years old, and you get into that place where you're no longer here in this physical, you've switched data streams, and you're a little concerned about this other world you're in now that's different because it's something totally new and you don't know what to expect or what's in it or whether it's nice or whether it's not. So you're a little apprehensive. Well, the first thing you're going to get is a monster of some sort, or get attacked by a thug of some sort. And then you will respond with violence, and you'll all be doing chop moves. You all will look like something out of the Matrix movie, where they're doing their martial arts stuff. And you'll do that until you grow up enough to realize that force is not always the best answer. That you and your white sword of truth that you use to fell these monsters is not the best solution. And then you learn that when you see those monsters, you just ask them if they're having a nice day, and poof, they disappear. They were just there to give you a choice to how you chose to deal with them. So yes, you'll get things that are at your level in order to help you learn and grow up. And you may do martial arts for 10 years in your meditations. You may think that, that non-physical world out there is all full of monsters and they're all scary. And that's because it takes you more than 10 years to grow out of that, grow beyond that. So anyhow, some people just pause there for a day. Other people stay there for decades. It depends on how quick a learner you are and how much you've learned already from past experiences. What's your quality of consciousness? If you've got a high quality of consciousness, you know how to deal with things like that very easily, and you don't need violence.
Thank you, Tom. I know
Yeah.
how I'm really amazed at how this unfolded from your little bit of information that you studied on Einstein. That just proves to me the process that you developed for Thomas Park, why it was so intricate and why that it was necessary that people follow that intricate process in order to be so involved. Imagine having Einstein's intellect considering this problem of C as a constant and so completely involved in that it developed into something so significant as his as answer to his
Mm-hmm.
special relativity theory. That's
Mm-hmm.
just amazing to me.
Yeah. Well, he decided that C was a constant because nothing else really seemed very rational. That C was a constant seemed like that seems to be the way the world works. That's rational, and that was his intellect. So he knew that. That was kind of his going-in assumption. Now, given that C was constant, what would a person on a light beam, going the speed C, what would they see? And then what if they were going just 9/10 the speed of light and half the speed of light? And as you work those problems out, you realize you can actually do the math to answer those questions very simply. I mean, it's just some algebra. It's not like advanced math or anything. It's just some algebra. What you have to do, and what his genius was asking the right questions. You see, he knew the right questions to ask, and when he got answers, he understood that this was part of a bigger picture. It's not just that, oh, look, reality is really strange. There's time dilation and length contraction and all these very strange things going on there. Isn't that weird? He could have done that and then gone on about his business, but he didn't. He said, this is a part of reality that we don't understand. So let's try to understand it from a bigger perspective. Let's incorporate other parts of what we know about reality, like gravity and other things. Let's see where this takes us. So he had a mind that was open and inquisitive, and he used his intuition to help him decide what the right questions were.
It's the right question. The next question, there's never an answer, there's always the next question. That was so
Yeah.
interesting, Tom. And that's something you've done with your theory too, being from the right brain perspective, learning the left brain approach with physics. That's something that you did also.
Yeah, but it's not just science that does that. Scientists have their eureka moments, where they intuitively get answers, or at least pointed toward answers. But it happens all over the place. A lot of authors get their stories in the same way. Those stories come out of their intuition. They don't just logically make all that stuff up. They kind of see the picture. They live it. They experience that picture. They put themselves in the roles of the various players, and they experience the interactions and the reactions. And then they come back and use their intellect to write it all down and turn it into proper language. But a lot of the creativity done, an artist that paints pictures, if all he does is has great technique, then people may look and say, wow, look at that picture. It looks almost like a photograph. Isn't that amazing? But that art doesn't really speak to people. I mean, it speaks of fantastic technique and skill, but the art that you look at that really talks to you, that you have feelings, you have connections with, you can kind of get where the artist was emotionally when he did that and what he was thinking of, and it means something to you. That kind of art can't come from the intellect. That kind of art isn't, I want to have a protest piece of art, so I'll have this and I'll have that. If it all comes out to your intellect, you look at it and you say, yeah, that's nice, but it doesn't really affect me very much. The stuff that comes out of your soul, the stuff that comes out of your intuition and your non-intellectual consciousness, that's what you put on a canvas that people look at and they get it. Not intellectually. If somebody says, well, tell me what you see, it's like, well, that's not the point. It's what I feel. It's the feelings I get. It's the connections that are made. It's the big picture that now becomes clearer because I look at this piece of art. Now that, I think, is very valuable art. it's not just technique. There's a lot of technique. You have to have good technique to do that, but you also have to come at it from an intuitive side as well. And music is the same way. If you take a musician and he has tremendous technique, the best technique in the world, he can play faster than anybody and more accurate than anybody. Well, that's nice, and everybody can be amazed to listen to him play something where he's hitting, 20 notes a second or something. He's just so fantastic. But you listen to the music and they say, well, that's pretty amazing, but I'd rather go listen to something else. And what you'd rather go listen to is something that had feeling in it, something that means something to you on the interior view, not just to your intellect. You can appreciate intellectual things. They're beautiful too in their own way, in their perfection perhaps, of the style or of the technique. But the stuff that really talks to you, the stuff that you really like, is because of the emotions it generates in you, the way it makes you feel. And that then is art. The rest is technique. And the thing is that now we have computers that surpass humans in technique. So you could probably give a computer a paintbrush or a printer, which is just a computer's kind of paintbrush, and they can print out, they can paint to as much resolution, that they're physically capable of doing. And it can be better, higher resolution than a photograph. So does that mean that the computer is a great artist? It doesn't mean that. When we look at art, we think of feeling. We think of what does it say? What do we get out of it? Not just be amazed at the perfection of the technique. We look at computer art and we say, yeah, okay, they probably did that whole picture in less than 30 seconds. Amazing. But
it's missing that feeling.
Yeah, but it's not the same.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So many people were concerned about that aspect of being able to create art, but it will never replace the consciousness element and that intuition and that feeling.
Yeah. So most all places, art, music, science, where creativity is required, where you need to go where no one else has gone before, where you have to do something unique and individual, something special, solve a problem that hasn't been solved before. Almost all of that initiates out of the intuition. And then the follow-up comes with the intellect, who puts equations to it, who works out the details, the logical consequences, and other things. But most of that creativity starts with the intuitive side. So there's a lot of good reason to develop that intuitive side, to get that intellect to sit down and be quiet long enough that you can actually train that intuitive side, can teach it to do what it does best, which is just come up with knowledge and information. And of course, it gets that information from the data that's in consciousness. Consciousness has its own data collection. It's got its own archives, if you will, and all that data is available there. All those archives are there because our reality is a virtual reality computed in consciousness. So every detail has to be known and archived.
That's wonderful. Thank you. You have more power than you think. Hi, this is Donna from MBT Events. I have had the privilege to work with Tom Campbell for nearly 20 years now, and I can tell you from the feedback received through all those years that he has improved and changed thousands of lives with his My Big Toe theory. As a physicist and explorer of the larger reality, Tom has developed a program where you can learn to access and develop your natural ability as consciousness. His expertly crafted binaural beats are included. Details are in the description below. Thank you.
I and MBT Events hope you like this video. If you do, then you should consider being a Patreon member, because Patreon members get early access to our special content. You will also be able to get your questions answered by me in special Q&A sessions, and most importantly, your contribution as a patron member will enable us to produce the content that you're looking for. So thank you.